Hello, everybody out there on Spaceship Earth, and welcome to yet another episode of Wheel Bite, coming to you live from San Francisco, California. This week's episode, we are super stoked to welcome our first guest, Shawn Connolly, who rode for Think Skateboards, the subject of this week's episode. Shawn is a very well-respected skate legend around the Bay Area, and it was so cool to just get to sit down and talk to him about this era of his life and his time with such a prestigious company like Think. We get into some of the real nitty-gritty of the story. So I'm just going to turn it right over to the episode, which was recorded at the San Francisco Skate Club, which is one of the best youth skateboarding organizations in this city. You can find more information on their programs at sfskateclub.com. They are open at 11 a.m. and located at 635A Divisadero Street in San Francisco, California. They've got boards, they've got clothes, they've got an incredible catalog of skateboard-related media, and they do great things for the local skating youth of San Francisco. So if you can, check them out. And once again, thanks again, Shawn, for joining us. Here we go. The Think Skateboards episode with Shawn Connolly.
Welcome to San Francisco.
Don't skate here.
I feel like it's dangling by a fucking strain of bone marrow.
East Coast powerhouse.
From New York, I stab you in the Russian fork.
Carter, it is fucking Friday the fucking 10th.
I'll give you $100 and I'll take out the Benihana and you slide that 75-foot handrail.
I especially like the flip of the board.
What up, what up? Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Wheel Bite. I am host one of two, Theodore Mater, and with me as always is
Jay Green here.
And today we are joined by local legend, entrepreneur, and professional skater,
Shawn Connolly. I don't know if I can claim all that stuff, but
let's just roll with it.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Let's just roll with it.
Yeah.
Local legend for sure.
Yeah, today we are talking about, we're doing the first installment of something that Jeremy and I have wanted to do for a while, and that is defunct companies that are no more, that we grew up enjoying, loving, watching. And today we're going to talk about Shawn's. Was that your first sponsor, actually?
It was my first board sponsor, yeah.
Yeah. Think Skateboards. Legendary company from the 90s. One of the more notorious San Francisco brands for sure. Mm-hmm. And we're going to kick things off with remembering the most standout thing from Think, and for me personally, it was their logo. I mean, that logo, whether it be the light bulb or like Think in like the cool sort of raver-esque font, you know, I always felt they were a good logo, can stand the test of time in so many different ways. You know, look at something like just the Misfits logo, or the Thrasher logo.
Are you talking about the light bulb or the tag logo?
Both of them.
Okay.
I think both of them, like...
Well, the tag was first, right?
I think the light bulb was first.
I think maybe the light bulb was first and the tag was second.
Okay.
But that's very early on.
Okay.
I think that because, and I was going to get into this later on and name some people that skated for Think, but I think Drake Jones has the light bulb tattooed on his hand, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, because little known fact that he rode for Think. I was going to talk about that, but
really,
yeah, you know,
we'll get into it.
Yeah. So, and that was so far back that it makes me think it's before the tag. Yeah.
Cool. Oh wow, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I hope I can throw some other zingers in there.
So I feel like I have an interesting relationship with just Think in general. Being from San Francisco, it was one of the first brands, if not the first brands and companies that I very directly related with the city. And, you know, looking back at it as an adult and later on in my skate life, and we'll go into that later in this episode also, but I am wondering why I so heavily related it with San Francisco. Obviously, the brand was being ran out of the city, but what I learned is that a lot of the skaters, a lot of the talent that was brought in weren't necessarily city skaters or from the city, or maybe had been in the city or the Bay Area for a while, but I always just very directly related Think with San Francisco skateboarding. And then, of course, in typical fashion, I'm going to give a two-parter. Way later down the road, I don't know about a best memory, but I was really happy when Adrian Williams got on Think, and I finally felt like he's one of my all-time favorites, and he's beyond underrated, if you ask me.
Absolutely.
And I felt like Think made sense for him, and he put out that little part he had. There was like a DVD. Actually, think I went to the premiere across the street at the Independent.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
And this was the last video they made.
It was Aces Wild or something like that.
Yeah, that wasn't the last video, but that was like featuring mostly his. He had the major part. Yeah, that was really good.
I was super stoked when he got on, and I think I felt that way every sponsor he had. I was like, oh man, like this seems like a good fit. Like let's find him a good home.
Yeah.
And I was just hyped for him, and it seemed to make sense.
Okay, so I'm trying to think about, like, I want to give you a first-hand account of like what impacted me the most with Think. I feel like actually one of the first skate demos I ever saw was a Think demo, and it was in Maine, and that's where I'm from, Maine, and it was pretty surreal. You know, I was from a little small town. I didn't grow up with like a skate shop in my hometown, and so I had to go like 45 minutes to this skate shop in Portland, South Portland, Maine. Middle of nowhere. I don't even know why they had a Think demo or how it worked, but it was a Think demo, and it was Dandra Hobel, and if you remember, Adrenaline was through. It wasn't even Street Corner yet, but it was Think. Adrenaline was out of the same warehouse.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a demo with him, Justin Strubing. That's why I'm making the connection between Adrenaline at the time, and I can't remember the other. Phil Shile was there.
Wow.
Yep, I absolutely remember him being there.
Heavy.
And a couple other skaters, but I don't really remember who they were. Maybe some AMs. But the photographer that was cruising with them was Matt McGrath. So it was really cool because like I met Matt at the time at the demo. We were just sitting around in the grass, and I met Matt, and he was like super cool dude, like real down to earth. We were just chatting about this and that, and he was like, "Yeah, I live in San Francisco," and I was like, "Oh, I want to go there someday." You know, I watched them skating, and like, dude, they were just ripping. They were just killing it. Like Justin Strubing killing it. Phil Shile obviously is just like so natural on the skateboard, and Drahobel just killing it. You know, he was probably kind of weird for him being on tour and coming back to close to his hometown and whatnot. I don't know, but we went from that spot, and then I kind of tagged along with them, and I don't know if I was showing them street spots or if what the deal was, but we went to this bank spot that was like it was a semiconductor industrial setting, but it had these banked walls that were super steep, and they were just like killing it, like cruising up on this wall, sticking to it, doing all these tricks. Like we skated there and we do wall rides on it basically, but they were like riding up the wall doing backside flips, and I just watched them skating, and they were just landing everything, and they weren't even filming the tricks, you know, they were just like doing it. It had a huge impact on me, and I was like, this is rad, because these dudes aren't just filming everything. They did a demo. They skated for like so many hours and whatever, and then they went street skated, and they just like kept putting it down. I'm like, why aren't they taking pictures of like this is like the best skateboarding I've seen live, and you know, kind of like up to that point. So that struck me as like, these are kind of real dudes. So I had a lot of respect for that.
How did you end up like tagging along with them?
Well, I knew Dan.
Okay.
You know,
okay.
So it was like, you know, looking back, he was probably like just putting up with me. Like, oh yeah, okay. Like
you can come.
Yeah. Because he probably already knew that spot. He probably took us to that. Took everybody to that spot, and I was just like, yeah. You guys, there's this really good bank down the street, and because I was just a kid, I think I was 17.
Oh wow.
I think I was 17, which is kind of older for skateboarding now.
How much older was Dan than you at the time?
You know, it's weird when you're younger because, like, you feel like 2 years. Like, if someone's 2 grades ahead of you, it feels like they're like,
they're way older.
Yeah. I think Dan's like, I'm just gonna guess about 4 years older than me, just based on the fact that we weren't in high school at the same time because we went to the same high school in Brunswick, Maine. So,
oh wow,
I'm just guessing because like he was already out before I was in, so it's a minimum of 4 years. But you know how it is when you're a pro skater that's kind of older. You're 32 for like 7 years.
Yeah.
You know,
Currently.
Yeah. Nobody wants to brag about how old they are in skateboarding, but the first experience of like kind of putting that timeline together or just thinking back was in my art class. Dan was into art and I was into art, and in my art class I was going through the paintbrushes, and I found a paintbrush that had his name on it, said Dandra Hobel on it in the art class, and I'm like, oh, this is Dandra Hobel's paintbrush. Like, okay.
That's so
you know,
fan out.
But in a way, it was kind of cool because, you know, it brought it down to earth. It was like, okay, this is a dude that lived in our hometown. Our hometown is shit. Like, there's nothing there. It was a terrible place to skateboard. And, like, he had made it on to this, you know, he had a picture in a magazine or a trick in a video or whatever. From my perspective at that time, that was like, you know, worlds away. It kind of made it possible.
I mean, that has got to be pretty huge. You know, here's, like you said, you're in this small town in New England that's so far removed from what is considered to be any sort of epicenter of skate. A guy who's getting coverage and is part of one of the biggest scenes at the time, because he was involved with the whole EMB movement and everything. You know, I always think of that portrait of him at EMB with like all the stickers on his freshly shaved head. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I don't think I do.
It's awesome. He has like a big Think sticker on his bald head, and he's like standing there on the bricks, and it's freaking awesome.
And that's around the time where like the industry is heavily moving to California, or it's like exploding in California.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially San Francisco.
Yeah, at that time it was just like San Francisco was a spot, man. Like, you know, there was Embarcadero. It was just blowing up. I want to say right around that time, a couple key videos came out. There was a Think video that came out shortly after, but this is probably like 94, I'm thinking, and when the demo was. Influential video, I would say, was the Stereo video had come out, and that was just like dudes skating down the street, like they look good on their skateboards. You didn't have to do really hard tricks. You know, that wasn't necessarily true. It was the aesthetics of it, and that just always drew me to San Francisco. That, and I think the Ride On video came on shortly after that. And when the Ride On Deluxe video came out, I was like, it was a sealed deal. It was just like, that's the place to go. You know, there's no other place. To me, I didn't know the difference between California, like all the subtleties of it. It was like, I didn't know that Rick Giaramello skating in Southern California wasn't the same as Henry Sanchez skating in Embarcadero. You know, I knew there were different styles, but I didn't know that there was that distance and like what made those two things different, you know.
So then what and when brought you to California? Like, how long after finishing high school did it take you to get to San Francisco?
It didn't take long. I basically I got the opportunity to move from Maine to live in Costa Rica because my father was living there. I got to kind of get out for a winter. And all I knew was that Costa Rica wasn't Maine. You know, I was like, oh, I'll go there, you know. I skated every day. And it wasn't the best place to skate, but it wasn't bad. Like, it wasn't snowing every day, you know what I mean? So I stayed there for about 10 months, and I got back to Maine in May 15th. And I remember thinking, okay, if I get back to Maine in May 15th, the weather's going to be good. And I was on the plane, and they were like, all right, we're about to touch down in Maine. The temperature is about 36 degrees. And I was like, it's May 15th. Like, it's 36 degrees. I was like, I'm out of here. So I worked for a summer cleaning hotel rooms. Total crap job, but it was kind of fun. Like, it was a lot of hijinks to be had cleaning hotel rooms.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Probably find some weird shit.
Oh, man.
It's its own podcast.
Yeah.
I just remember getting trained and looking at the guy, and he's training me, and I'm like, so we have to get every hair out of the bathtub? And he's like, yes. And I was like, okay, this is going to be tough. Bring it back to a motivational moment. When I was working there, I knew what I was doing. I was saving money to move to San Francisco. So every time that I would change a curtain in a shower, I'd pop the curtain pieces on, and I would think about tricks that I wanted to do when I got to San Francisco. So I'm like putting up the curtain, and I'm like, okay, I want to do this. And of course, in your mind, you're like, I'm going to do this down the Gons.
Yeah.
I'm going to do this down Hubba, you know.
Oh, boy.
But it was motivational for me to like grind it out. And it was like kind of my first job.
Okay.
So it was like the first time, and that's old to be having the first job. Shortly after that, I moved to San Francisco I left in November, took a train out here, which is kind of not the normal way to do it. But me and my friend Dan, we wanted to see the distance that's created by doing that. And I don't know, we were just not smart about it. You spend so much money on the train, like eating and stuff like that, it's ridiculous. Then we got to San Francisco, and I moved here and signed a lease on an apartment in December 95.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, was Think your first board sponsor at that point? And then how did you get involved with them? Was meeting Matt McGrath and or knowing Dandra Hobel part of the deal, or was it just completely random that you wound up there?
It had absolutely nothing to do with it. Like, it's just an anecdote from the past, you know.
Wow.
So that's pretty crazy, because usually that's how things work. You know, you kind of create a relationship with skaters. You like skate with them, and they're like, you know, this makes sense. We can stand this guy. We'll put him on a team. You know, it's not too annoying. But what happened was, I actually worked at High Speed Productions, which is Thrasher, Slap, Juxtapose, and I don't know, they had a couple other magazines they were doing for a while. And I would skate on breaks. There was a 10 o'clock break every day, and I was just a skate maniac. And I just skated every day. And, you know, dudes would be hanging out by there was like a donut truck or taco truck that would pull up for 10 o'clock break. And I'd put in work. Like, I was like, okay. You know, and it wasn't that I was trying to skate in front of them. It was totally, because, dude, you got to think about me. I was like, if you picture the evolution picture of the human, like, becoming erect. Like, I was like the second one. And picture it holding a skateboard.
Yeah.
Like, I was Cro-Magnon skate. Like, I couldn't communicate. Like, all I knew how to do was just skate and, like, break down skating in my own mind. Like, I couldn't translate it. You know, I couldn't talk about it or whatever. All my stuff was wrong. I was doing frontside flips, pushing down. Like, I was just doing it all wrong. But I skated hard, and I caught Fausto's eye during one of those 10 o'clock breaks. You know, I kind of knew they were watching, and I was kind of, things were clicking, and I'm like, okay, I'll keep doing tricks. And I probably went, like, going back and forth, and I did all these tricks, and I was just kind of feeling it one day. And as I walked in, Ed Riggins, who's the publisher of High Speed, said, "Oh, you caught Fausto's eye today." And up to that point, I had been buying boards, because when you worked for High Speed, you could buy boards from Street Corner for cost. And I was buying boards over there, and I was like, this is a life. Like, I'm getting paid $5.50 an hour, and I can buy skateboards whenever I want for $20. No, what else
do I need?
Yeah, what else do you need? It's only 47 hours a week, you know, and I have to commute like an hour back and forth from downtown. You know,
the dream.
This is the dream, and I can film for an hour and a half on the weekends. I bought boards over there, but after that, I went in one day, and Fausto was in there, and he's like, this guy doesn't pay for boards anymore. You know, he just christened it, and it was a done deal. And
I'm sure as a kid, what does that mean? Does that mean I'm float? Does that mean I'm on? Like, that's especially coming from Fausto.
Yeah. Yep, because that wasn't the team manager. It wasn't the owner. It was like the owner of the owner's owner.
That was my next question. Yeah. You bringing up Fausto's name, I didn't know was it just because he was kind of the boss man around there that he was able to make those calls? Because I didn't know he had necessarily like a hand in on Think.
Yeah, that was his baby. That was his company. Like, he just kept it going, you know, even when it was slumping or whatever, or it would go through different changes of riders and whatnot. That was his thing. Like, he stuck with it. And of course, there was Keith Cochran and Fish and Greg Carroll, you know, and they were the ones that kind of did most of this stuff. It seemed like to me, from my perspective. And then there was the salespeople, warehouse people, and riders and whatnot, and art department. But this is like the golden era of skating. Like, there was all these people employed in this building, you know, and there'd be like lunch break, and it was the artists were there, and the warehouse people were there, the sales guys were there, the owners were there. You know, they're all in one place. Whereas now it's probably like everybody's kind of split up, and you know, it's not cohesive. But during that time, it was rad. And I started getting boards from them, and I think Keith was like, dude, you got the green light or whatever. And so I started getting boards. And I think Jake Phelps had a little something to do with it. I think he might have put in a good word for me at one point. I'm just kind of backtracking a little bit, but I don't know if that's exactly the case. But at the time, it's kind of funny because I was trying to get on a company. I was trying to get boards, and the other person that I was talking to was ATM Skateboard, and I had sent them some videos. And it's funny because I took it so serious. Like, I was like, oh man, what should I do? Like, I went to Jake and I asked him for his advice, you know, and It was like the most terrible advice you ever wanted. You know, it was just non-cohesive. Like,
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for that.
Oh man,
one.
yeah. Me coming to him for advice, he's just like, you know what he did? He sat me down and he put in some footage of like Dandra Hobel skating, and he's like, "Oh, this is a pro skater," and then he put in some footage of that he had that hadn't been released yet of Kerry Getz and Bam Margera, who were AMs at the time.
Wow.
And they were just killing SF. They were grinded down the double kink rail by Muni Station, by Powell Station.
Yeah. What?
And did all this stuff at Black Rock, and like he's like, "This is what AMs do," like. Just basically belittled me to the point of like wondering if I should even be able to get grip tape from him.
Yeah.
But eventually, I talked to my other person that I went to for advice was Lance Dawes. So Lance was like really kind of like somebody that I respected his opinion. Asked Lance the same thing, and Lance was like more straight up. He's like, "Dude, one's across the street and one's like in Southern California." He's like, "Why don't you go for the one across the street? It just makes more sense." And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah, it sounds like a good plan to me, you know." So I took him up on it, and I started getting the boards, and yeah, it just went from there.
I want to talk too for a minute about the Think squad around that time too. Was pretty heavy. Like we've already mentioned Dandra Hobel, but like Phil Shao was one of the big ones, and then Wade Spire, and you know Pat Duffy was getting pulled into the mix. Yep. I always forget that he was involved with Think because I always like to remember him during his Toy Machine era, but Diego was on the team. Yeah, he was on, and then Colt Cannon was on the come up. So, I mean, what was it like skating with these people? Was it intimidating, or were you just stoked like to have these kind of people in the same circle as you, like motivating you almost? Yeah,
I mean, all those guys are so amazing. I mean, that's the thing about Think was like, it's funny because no one was heavy image with like not really a lot of ability, you know, to back it up. It was like the opposite. It was like they had all this ability, but Think could never find a way to like properly kind of like showcase people, you know? I feel like they would kind of mess it up for people. Like with Diego, they called him the Butcher, and it was like Chop Chop. I think maybe Jake might have labeled him that, but it's weird and it doesn't make any sense, you know? Looking back, we're like, it makes sense a little more. But and then Danny Fuenzalida was on, and he was the Chilean prince or whatever, you know? And they would like, it was just weird connections that they would make, and I feel like it never really worked out. But it was always a team of dudes that were like really skating. You know, they were really putting it down, and no way to argue it. It was like they could put on a demo, they could skate like everything. And I think that's one of the reasons why it didn't work out for me, because I couldn't really skate everything, because like I didn't skate parks. You know, I didn't grow up skating that stuff, and that was like a soft spot for me. You know, it was like I was a street skater. Like I was skating 60 millimeter wheels in like 96, 97. You know, I was like heavily influenced by Philadelphia skaters, which spent some time there and skated with all those dudes. And to me, that's where my heart was, and it wasn't in the transition skating, you know?
Would you say that was around the peak of Think and the height of the company around that time?
I feel like it was. I mean, I went to a video premiere for Damage when it came out, and it was like I had just moved to SF. So funny. It was at the Red Vic Theater, which isn't there anymore, on Haight Street. And I don't know how I found out about it, but we're like all skating up there. We're going to the Think premiere, like, and we had just like showed up at it. I remember Henry Sanchez was there. A bunch of dudes from the pier were there, and Henry was trying to sell some wheels. It was pretty funny. The lights went out, and like you just hear Henry go, "Want to buy some wheels?" it was so rad. And I didn't know anybody, and I watched the video, and I'm like, it was a sick video. You know, we just like left the premiere. It was like just hit the streets skating, and it just got us so amped to skate. So I feel like that was the golden era, and Phil Shao was such a good skateboarder. I mean, he was just so graceful on the skateboard. You know, he had so many good qualities other than just being a good skateboarder, you know, that you just couldn't deny. Like when I met him, he always remembered my name after that. You know, we'd see each other and he'd call me by name, and I was like, wow, that's cool. You know, and he always put down something amazing when he skated. And when I started working at High Speed, the first cover that I shipped working there was the 5-0 grind on Miley shot at night. Man. That was amazing, and it's really tragic, you know, that he's gone, and that's a really super bummer. I was young at the time, and I remember when he passed, I went over and I had a broken truck or something. Like I really needed to get stuff, and I was like, man, I don't want to go over there and get something today. You know, I just don't want to. You know, I know everyone's really emotional, and it was just such a bummer. Like, you know, it just hit me when I went over there. I just felt like such a kook, like asking for, but I needed the Kingpin or something. But I felt like after Phil passed. Paul Zuanich, there's another name from the past. Paul Zuanich ripped, dude. He was super rad, dude. He used to do a lot for the company that people don't know about. He was over skating after that, you know, because sometimes this stuff affects you in different ways. So he was over it. I feel like Dan not having Phil, I don't know, they were kind of like tight. Maybe like loosened up the grip on things. And yeah, it just got kind of weird after that. It kind of got a little weird. Like they got all these foreign riders on there, like Veith Kilbert. And one day they were like, Veith Kilbert, he's gonna be pro for us. He's supposed to be the Muska from Europe. And it was like, oh, he's a Muska from Europe that we've never heard of. Like, you know.
He's the Veith.
Yeah, the Veith.
I'm glad you touched on Think's kind of weird, ambiguous marketing, I guess, with the riders, because that's something Ted and I were talking about the last like week or two, and something that we've really wanted to talk about was, it's really interesting to think back that, because in my local mind, Think was bigger than big at the time, and it was just, you know, one of those kind of cultural phenomenas. And it's interesting to think that they had all this talent and they had kind of the big buzz and they had Fausto and the Carroll name behind it, but for whatever reason, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, couldn't keep a consistent theme or foster the talent they had. And it sounds like Phil passing was like a big blow to the company and a lot of the riders that were with the crew. It's just interesting to kind of reflect and look at this whole heavy roster of dudes they had on, and inevitably where Think ended up.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. So with him passing and then the change, it just got weird for a little while. And with the ads and stuff, like I feel like the problem as well was there's too many cooks in the kitchen, you know, and there was like people, like one time I was in there and honestly, like I need to also point out the fact, I think you guys might have chosen me because I'm the oldest skateboarder, you know, you know, so I can tell you good stories, you know, but the other thing,
on the porch type situation.
You know, I'm the oldest dude, you know, that skates on the Visadero block, so you're just gonna come over and interview me, but it's funny because I don't, you know, people don't even know that I skated for Think. I was very small on their radar. They didn't promote me at all when I skated for them, and so it's kind of funny for me to be here as, you know, speaking as an authority on the issue. But at the same time, like, you know, that was a very influential time in my life. It's the kind of time in your life where you really remember everything, and it's very important to you, and all the things happen. It's like it kind of molds you to be the person you eventually become. I feel like that era just meant so much to me, and I put so much effort into like what I did, and I still care about skateboarding, you know. But during that time, it was just like I was 100% into it. So back to Too Many Cooks in the Kitchen. You know, I was there during a kind of like a graphics meeting. I was just kind of like privy to, I just walked in and they're looking at this graphic and they're kind of all saying like, oh, I like this, I don't like this, you know. And Fausto's like, he looks at, there's this gun and he's like, oh, you should put a bullet here coming out of the gun, like, you know, and it was kind of like Greg and Keith kind of looked at each other and like, oh yeah, we'll do that, yeah. And then he kind of like would leave the room and they'd be like, okay, like, you know, and I saw the eventual graphic that changed it and happened. So it always just kind of seemed like there was a bunch of people trying to figure out like what was going to sell, and they couldn't really figure it out. Like there was a series of like 2 years they didn't have skateboarding in their ads. Wow. There was like an ad with Tim McKenney with his feet up on some half-naked girl on a bearskin rug in front of a fireplace. And I remember them shooting that, and it was in the high-speed warehouse, and this girl walks in, and she's wearing like leopard print high heels, and I'm like, what's going on here? Yeah. And then they produced that ad, and I was like, okay, that's what they were doing. And then there was another ad with Wade Spire, dressed in it all in Nike gear with a basketball, and it said Grandmaster Wade. And it's just like, it was just really weird, you know.
That's and then really bizarre.
Yeah, and then there was a period where they had a few ads mocking the skateboarding in the Olympics, and they had a dildo with a skateboard wheels on the top, like first place, and there was a scooter on one side and like something on the other. They're kind of trying to pick fun at stuff, and, you know, kind of be like a little bit trying to stoke the fires a little bit, almost like a World Industries type of direction.
Well, that was the time to do that. A lot of people were doing that and taking subtle shots at others in the industry. It makes sense, but again, like to go back to just like the heavy roster and not have skate ads being put out is
because, like I said,
weird.
they always chose people that just ripped in person, like they put it down, and it's just like it just never properly got documented. Like Jerhobel didn't really have, I feel like, his first really representational video part until the Transworld video.
We were actually talking about that the other day, and how that Free Your Mind part was the first truly full-length showcase of his skating. That's like a good 4 or 5 minute part as like dedication. I think he has maybe 2 minutes worth of footage, and so much of it looks like it was shot at like contests or something like that, some janky wooden ramp, because I read an interview with him once where he even says, a lot of my parts were short back in the day because there just wasn't as much transition around, and the demand for it wasn't as high. By the time that Transworld video is coming out, transition is starting to kind of take the country by storm. It's a little more acceptable to put park footage in your part as long as it's really crazy, and that's the thing, half that part is him just destroying the Berkeley Park.
Oh, it stands the test of time. I mean, people looking back now, they skate like people are skating like Dan now.
Yeah.
But when he was doing it, everybody was like, they just didn't get it. I mean, when he was skating EMB, when he first moved here, it was like sick. Like I think he did a switch stalefish or a switch melon down the 7 at EMB. Like that's so different, But and then he was skating at EMB, but he was skating at had tricks at DMV. He had street tricks and stuff like that. But like the transition and stuff is where he really killed it. In hindsight, it's really stood the test of time because we look back at it and it's like, oh, that's just how it is, But a lot of people kind of dissed him because they didn't get the transition stuff. And
well, in the grand scheme of things too, within the scope of everything happening in San Francisco at the time, because like the era we're talking about, Stereo is still killing it. Anti-Hero is just coming into fruition. You're kind of in...
Real was killing it.
Yeah,
too,
well, I was about to say you're in the peak time of Real, because I feel like that era, like 95 to 2000 on Real, that's where you have like Kim Cardona, Matt Field, Cairo Foster's getting in the mix, Max Schaaf's winning all these competitions. But in the grand scheme of the SF scene, where did Think kind of stand in relation to all of that stuff?
You mentioned that it was like you kind of had the feel for it like it was SF, but it wasn't really SF. I think that was a part of the reason why they kind of lost their focus a little too, was because Think was a company that would sponsor like so many dudes in the middle of nowhere. They kind of had the Dogtown mentality of Dogtown later on, not like the really early stuff, but of sponsoring somebody from every town. And that was like an old way of doing it. Like you'd have riders, shop sponsored, getting boards. So like you probably had like 300 people in the middle of nowhere that were like, I ride for Think, and all the kids in the town were like down. And it wasn't too much different with their riders because a lot of the dudes were from Peninsula or like not really San Francisco. There was Corey Duffel who popped up and he was out in Duffel land.
Yeah.
And then, you've got all these riders from different places. It just didn't feel like they utilized San Francisco. I went on I don't know what it was. We did this day with this extreme television show one day. It was weird. I don't even know how I got invited to it, but we ended up going skating and hitting some street spots. And it was funny because I felt like everyone seems like they're kind of like a fish out of water, going street skating. And they were all talking about, San Francisco, and they wanted to kind of like promote Bay Area skate parks. Someone that was involved in sales at the time, and he was like, yeah, SF's great because it's in proximity to so many rad skate parks. And I'm like, man, this place is rad because we have EMB here, we've got Brown Marble, we've got Black Rock, we have these amazing, we had Pier 7 at the time, we had so many and we got the hills, it's just made for skateboarding. So I feel like they kind of lost it by, not staying SF. But man, that Jerhobel footage, like the old Thrasher videos of him bombing down sidewalk streets, it's almost like Bones Brigade stuff meeting like, more modern day. And it was just like, it was undeniably rad, like that Jerhobel could like translate into that stuff.
And who was the crew on Think that you were hanging out with? Or did you not even skate with a lot of those dudes? Like, because I know like you and Kenny Reed were tight, and like that always seemed like more of your posse, like Kenny and then like Nikhil and people like that. But were there dudes on Think that you were skating with regularly?
Okay, so Not really. Like, I was total loner. Like, I was down with my crew, like skating with Kenny, Kyle, Dan was our roommate. Like, we'd skate together all the time. And Kenny was getting hooked up. It's kind of funny because I was the first one to get sponsored, and then Kenny got on New Deal. We went out and took some photos with Lance Dawes, and he ended up getting a spread in the back of Slap called, it was a gallery.
Okay.
Yeah. We went out with Lance. I didn't really know him that well. I was just working at high speed, so we had to skate on the weekends or after 7. Kenny did the shifty ollie that ended up in I think it was the first gallery. It might have been the first gallery. 2-page spread. New Deal, dude at New Deal saw it. He remembered Kenny from back in the day, called him up, and the rest was history. He was off and running. And the way I got on Think, actually another side note to that is I skated for Circuit Wheels. And I don't know how I got on Circuit Wheels. Like, one day they were like, you're riding for Circuit Wheels, go out and take a photo for an ad tonight. I was like, okay, I know this ledge, I can skate, and went out with Luke Ogden. And Luke's like, I've got a spot for you. And he's like, what can you do on this? And I was like, I think I can switch 50-50 it. So I switched 50-50 the thing, and I think it took me 24 tries because it was a roll of film at the time. We're talking about film. And every time I would try so hard, I just slam on my neck every time. And then I made one. I didn't even know how photos worked. He was like, you just have to make one. And I was like, okay. And I made the one. And then I was like, I want to get something better. Let's go out tomorrow. And then I go into work at 8 a.m. and the next day, and they're laying out the ad with the Switch 50. And I'm like, okay, I guess I don't get a chance to step it up. But I was cool with the picture. And I was totally excited. That was the first picture I ever had in a magazine. And that kind of created my relationship with them moving forward. And that's why I'd go over and buy the boards. But I feel like the problem with me skating for Think at the time was, and sorry to bring it back to myself again, but I'm telling my story here. It was because Fausto put me on and Greg didn't put me on. And Greg Carroll was a team manager, and he was just like, who's this dude? Like, and I get it. It's totally cool. Like, I was just stuck in a situation at that point. And I was getting boards. It was always a little beefy, but when I shot that ad, I actually went over there and I was like, Greg, can I get a board to shoot this circuit ad? And this is before I rode for him. I was still paying for the boards. And he was like, yeah, you can go in the seconds pile. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was bummed. Brutal. And I picked out a Chris Sen board that was like, I think it was twisted. And it was like 9 inches wide. Oh. And I was so upset that I spray painted it at work outside on the back behind high speed. Like, that was like going out of my way, like, to spray paint a board. And so if you look at that picture, I have a black board. And I was just like, man, I'm shooting a picture for your wheel company, and it's out of the same distribution. And give me a second, like, but it's all good. Like, you got to claw your way up from nowhere somewhere. But yeah, I think that kind of had something to do with it.
That's definitely something we wanted to talk about. So Greg being involved, I guess I always thought he had started the company or he owned it or whatever it was. Just him being more or less royalty in skateboarding at the time, and with his brothers doing what he was doing. I can't help to think and wonder that had a lot to do with just Think and the competition at the time and how people perceived Think and seeing, or even maybe Greg trying to compete with what his brother had going on and just trying to, because at that time, Girl Chocolate was exploding, and it was the thing in skateboarding, and they were making a huge impact. And I always wondered about how that worked. It was a lot of Think's a lot of the attention Think was getting was because of Greg's name was attached to it. Not to take anything away from all the talented skaters and dope stuff they were putting out, but and being, I guess, under the Thrasher umbrella and a San Francisco hub like brand. I always wondered about that.
I don't know a lot about Greg's history before I got there, like about ownership or any of that stuff.
Okay.
I just know that he was a shot caller. He was a team manager, technically, as the guy who said who gets stuff. or who gets the ads. And then there was like there was Fish, and there was Keith Cochran, and then there was Fausto at the top. I don't know what the breakup was, but Greg was definitely like the one that he was like the guy in the street, like on the grounds. Like, you know, he was out there with the skaters. He would drive the van for a tour. You know, he was judging contests. He was doing emceeing contests around that time and stuff like that. You know, he was the one that was like really dedicated to like caring about Think and making sure that it was like as good as it can be. You know, he chose the riders, all that stuff. And I think it was just kind of bad because I started off on the beefy start with it, you know, with him. Total respect for him doing his thing. Yeah, I feel like just back to the too many cooks in the kitchen thing, you know, I don't feel like he was able to fully make Think what he probably wanted it to be, because, you know, it was getting pulled in all these different directions. But yeah, I mean, you remember hearing the story about him headbutting Colt Cannon at a contest? Like,
I know what you're talking
Colt
about.
Cannon quit, you know, and he, you know, there was a lot of stories about Greg Carroll being this like badass team manager, you know, don't cross him and all this stuff. And then I think he kind of had to live up to that. And Colt had quit, and then he said something like, you know, swear on Phil's. I don't even know, you know, this is just like hearsay. This is gossip. So, you know, take it with a grain of salt. But I believe that happened. There was some footage of it, like where he kind of like.
It's in Man Down at the very beginning. Yeah.
And
Wow.
So that just a little taste of like how serious he took it. And there was another incident that, like, as far as Greg goes, like taking his company seriously. There was a really big kind of like East Coast West Coast thing at the time, and I don't know if you guys, if you think about it in a time capsule of like history, you know, we had this like Biggie and Tupac, like they were still alive, like, you know, and they just had, there was the beef, they were just passed. So, you know, I kind of think about hip hop when I think about history and stuff like that, because that's something that I've always been into. So there was this East Coast West Coast thing. I feel like, you know, Greg represented California, San Francisco hard. You know, he's very Frisco, you know, always wearing a Giants hat, Niners hat, like, you know. I think he actually, I was living here for like 5 years, and I was wearing a Giants hat, and he's like, how long have you lived here? And I was like, 5 years? He's like, okay, barely get a pass. Like, you know, I don't even feel like I can wear a Giants hat right now.
Hey,
like
nowadays, he might have got checked because they were from Daly City. Right? And, I mean, there's a lot of, like myself, who might check a Daly City kid.
So you can say that.
You know what I'm saying? No. That's funny.
But, like, you know, and me being an outsider from Maine, you know, I mean, I didn't get sponsored until I was 17 or 18 at the time. And so, you know, I didn't grow up, you know, buying boards at 12 years old from a pro skater that lived on the block,
right?
You know, like all these kids in San Francisco. But I remember one of the other dividing moments for me and Think was I went on this East Coast tour from Philadelphia. They traveled from San Francisco to New York and back to San Francisco, and it was a slap tour, and it was Greg Carroll was in charge, and Brian Gaberman was there to shoot photos for Slap, and there was a bunch of pros, and they met up with me on the way back at Philadelphia, and I was staying at Ricky Iola's house. Wow. So he was a huge influence on me at the time too. Like, he's just like, you know, he's the godfather of Philly. He was a really good source for like information for me. Like, I'd go to him, like ask him what I should do and stuff like that. But at the time I was just getting to know him. The connection I had was he lived with Roger Brown, who huge Philadelphia influential skateboarder.
The other godfather of Philadelphia.
The original. Roger's a super rad dude. And he had lived in SF, and he was working sales at High Speed. Now, he was like, if you ever make it out to Philly, he moved back. He's like, you know, you can stay at my place. And I was just like, oh, I want to go to Philadelphia. Like, you know, Eastern Exposure 3 had come out. And I was like, this is what I was living in SF, but then I like gravitated back towards East Coast. And I was like, oh, I'll go out there for a little while. And so I was staying one summer with Rick and Roger. And they met up with me in Philly to take me on the rest of this tour. It was really weird because this is like early cell phone days. It was like you had to be a baller. You know, it was after the brick, but it was like before the Nokia, but it was like still like, you know, like the flip down.
Yeah, the big flip phones. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Greg had a cell phone, which is kind of like, it was baller status at the time. So he comes to pick me up, and I give him the address that we're at. And he calls me, and he's like 2 blocks away. And he's like, come out, I'm down the street. And I was like, this is weird. Like, why doesn't he come up and pull up to the front door to pick me up? So, like, I get out and I'm either rolling my bag of like, I look like Axel Foley checking into the hotel. I got my like trash bag with my stuff in it, or whatever, and I'm like dragging it down the street, and I get in the van with them, and then I'm like, okay, that was kind of weird, But it turns out that Rick had a beef with Greg that went way back. I guess there was some contest. Rick kind of told me the story. Some contest where like Greg was the MC and he was telling everybody to get off the course. Everyone that rides for Adventure is going to get the boot if you don't stop skating now. And Rick comes over and he goes, "Fuck you, I ride for Indy." And he keeps skating, and sometimes that's all it takes,
Oh man, Rick and Greg, I can do two strong personalities there.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
That's so gnarly.
So, but at the same time, me knowing each person very well, if these guys got in the same room, they would wind up best friends. Honestly, like they had so much in common, but sometimes that's tough when you have a lot in common with somebody. It's like you kind of. There's a lot of static, and they were on the younger side at the time too. Like I thought of them as being older, but like they were still young men figuring out their ways. It was a weird start, and I felt like it was kind of weird for Greg that I was with him, and he always. I'm assuming people think the worst, They're probably thinking like, oh, Rick's telling them all this stuff, and like, but I was just a kid, dude. I just wanted to skate, film tricks, and do my thing,
Right. So now looking back at it at this point, I know you said you had a handful of clips in dedication, and then the trade show video, you told me before we hit record that was the best footage that you'd ever had in your career.
Yeah. Not career, but like when I was skating for Think, that was the best footage I ever had. And it was a 5-minute trade show video that only got put onto, as far as I know, one VHS tape. And it was at a trade show, and it was pretty sick. It was like edited. There was some hip hop in it, and there was like some Guns. I was skating to the song that the Guns N' Roses song that Gino ended up skating to, and yeah, right. I think
it's so easy.
It's so easy. I feel like they took a swipe at me because there's like the part where he goes fall down, and then I fall down in the street in SF, like I hit my head in the footage. But I had this sick EMB line that I was so psyched on. I grinded this double kink rail in Potrero Hill, and they never saw this light of day. And that's how it is. Sometimes it's all good. But then I had 2 tricks in the dedication video.
Yeah.
And the 2 tricks they chose were tricks that people that worked for High Speed had filmed. And when they work for High Speed, they don't have to get paid for contributing the footage. So that was like the deciding factor. It was like, it wasn't on the merit of the tricks. It was because we don't have to pay John Tripp because he works at Slap or whatever. And so it was like 2 whatever tricks. And then my roommate's trick was the other one because they were like, oh, this is Sean's roommate. We don't have to pay him. So I had a back tail on the curved ledge. It's out in the Presidio.
Is that red one by Fort Mason?
I remember that ledge. Yeah.
I mean, it's still there. It's just so chunky now.
Yep. So I backtailed that, and then I did this backside 180 into the street. In Soma, that was like this, they were doing construction on something, and a wall was missing, so it was like a pop-up spot for a minute, backside 180 into the street. But it was like by no means like anything I wanted anyone to see, I just had no control over it, and that was in the video. And I think I'm crammed in between like Corey Duffel and Dustin Zimmerman. There's a name for you.
Young Corey has like an ollie or something like that.
And then he looks directly at the camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was pre-Freddy Krueger phase.
Yeah. Yeah.
He hadn't quite gotten to that level yet.
And there's another time I can speak on is Corey's rad. He's a rad dude. Like, loves skateboarding, like kind of weird image things at certain points, but whatever. The talent speaks for itself. But I went out there one time when he was really young, and we went to skate with him, and it was such a bizarre thing. Like, I came from the city,
Is this Walnut Creek? Or?
Yeah, I went to Walnut Creek.
Right, okay.
Took the BART.
Yeah, and I skated down the street to get a coffee or a soda from his house, and I was skating on the sidewalk, and it had these really deep cracks, and
yeah.
And everyone was looking at me like, what's this dude doing skating down the street? Like, this is illegal, and it was weird. Like, I went to his house, and he had 2 refrigerators, one that had like sports drinks. One was dedicated to the sports drinks that his mom was giving him to like fortify his bones so he could skate harder, and he's like 12 years old. And then he's got 2 stacks of boards under his bed, and like a mini ramp in the backyard, and like a rail out front. And they lived at the cul-de-sac, like, I guess that's what it's called. And I'm like, wow, this is like a whole nother world. Like, and they're like, do you want some more, snacks? And, it was just like this weird setting. And then we went out to skate, and, it was just a whole nother world.
Burbs.
Yeah. And I lived downtown. I ate ramen. You know, I lived on like $1.25 a day. Like, I kept checking underneath the cushions in the mattress to see if there's more quarters every day. Hoping that someone dropped some money down. You know, struggling.
Yeah, you can't live in SF like that anymore. That's for sure. But in the grand scheme of your career now,
that's kind of funny.
Well, do you look at Think as like, was it more of a stepping stone, or would you say that's the first major like block of your career within skateboarding?
To say career is kind of like it's kind of tough for me to like accept that, because I didn't really ever make any money skateboarding. Eventually I rode for ATM and I got like a check for something that I did, some video I was in. Like I think it was $5,000 bonus.
That's big.
Yeah. I mean, even at the time, like that to me, that was like, I'm not working for 3 years. Like, I've got this covered. Like,
you're tired.
I was doing math on the boxed macaroni and cheese that was 37 cents across the street, and I was like, I can live off it for like this long. But yeah, I feel like Think was it was kind of a stepping stone, and it was just because they had a good eye for talent, but like they couldn't keep it for some reason. I don't know why. And like Stefan Janowski skated for him, you know, and
I had no idea.
And then he went on to do all this stuff. There was a couple other dudes that I know that skated for him. I mentioned Dustin Zimmerman. Like, he ripped, dude. He was so good. He 360 flipped the large gap at the library, like the bigger one. He did all this stuff. Like, he was so amazing, and he just got passed up. Tony Mariano skated for him.
Wow.
You know, ended up, I don't know if he still skates for Anti-Hero, but he was on Anti-Hero. But he didn't work out, and Carl Watson skated for him. But
I remember Carl skating for them, yeah.
And there was just so many dudes, like, and I think that's kind of what it became, was like, you know, this is the starter kit, and then we take it from there. And to be honest with you, I feel like Adrian probably got on Think with that mindset and perspective that he was going to like go on to do more. But the industry just kind of is what it is sometimes, and it's like, and he was probably like, you know, I'm just going to make the most of this opportunity. And he made the most of it. Like, no one can deny that, like, you know, that was another golden era for them, was when that period came back. And I'm sure you want to probably get into that newer stuff. But, like, oh, man, he's so good, you know. It's just so rad to watch him skate. He's got his own selection of tricks. He's got his own style. I know he's trying to get on Zoo, and that didn't really pan out. Yeah, he made a good mark for himself. But kind of lost track with that. But
if there's one dude who I would say, maybe it's not the right way to put it, but made a career out of being on Think and maybe maximized his time, I always think of Danny Funzaletta. He was on for a while.
Absolutely.
And he had a couple really sick video parts and not just Think projects and other stuff too. But yeah, moving into that new era and considering how Think was used, I think it's just the Pat Duffy and Drehobel. It sounds like Drehobel was on for a lot longer. It seems like they were kind of pulling people like, oh, we can pull Pat Duffy over for a little bit and that'll create some attention. Like, they were kind of, with their clout maybe they had in the industry, they were able to pull people in. And it's interesting to me just to talk about Drehobel and the free your mind part, because some would say that's later in his career.
Absolutely.
Right?
It is. I mean, he was on Crooked at that point when he did Free Your Mind. And I've always kind of looked at Think's star children being Drehobel and Phil Shao. You know, those are two names that, especially Phil, like, Phil will always be remembered within skating because he was just one of the dudes in that era who went truly buck wild in terms of, like, he went bigger than most people expected. He had a style that was very much his own.
He was the ultimate ATV before it was cool.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Just like Drehobel.
And and they were kind of the people that Think harbored very early on, and they were allowed to grow with them backing them.
they were both way ahead of their time. Like I mean, I mentioned the fact that Drehobel was skating transition, and like it didn't get understood until later on, and now it's like you've got the people skating parks, like there's so many people, Raven Terche and all these dudes like killing transition, and they're making a living off skating tranny, which is like, that's pretty crazy to look at that time, because you needed street photos and it had to be street. But Phil was super ahead of his time too. I mean, he was just like skating super fast. He skated everything. It's just so rad to look back at that stuff. But I don't know if you guys, I'm kind of going off a little rumor and stuff I had heard, but I had understood that Phil and Drahoba were going to start a company.
Yeah, I've read about that before, and I think it was called something ridiculous like Dump Truck.
Yeah, it was, Well, it was so early on in the stages. It was like, that was probably like Dan's like sense of humor. It was kind of like him taking Freedom Clothing and making a board company with it. It was going to be a bunch of like piss cats and like dudes with their heads up their butt or whatever graphics.
Yeah, some hilarious graphics.
Basically looked like an 8th grade bathroom like drawing, or something like that. But, superimposed on a pair of cargo pants. It would have been cool to see what that would have, been had it manifested and happened. But, that's a shame that never came to fruition, because we all would have liked to have seen that.
Was Think ever, and you may even not even have the answer, but just honestly, like reliving the history with you and hearing your story, it gives me anxiety just hearing how the company was ran, and that there was just so much going on and they could never really find a cohesive theme or anything. Were they ever a profitable company?
I'm sure they were. I think the way that they ran things was like, it was probably pretty tight. Like this era of skateboarding it's not around anymore. It's like they were making the boards down the street. They're screening the boards in Hunters Point. They were doing the cut and sew down the street. It was all worked out. It was before heat transfer graphics, so they were screen printing boards, on water-based ink. Like, wow. I would get a board, and if I peeled the shrink wrap off, and I was at the bus stop one day with a board I was taking to FTC to trade in for another shape, and these drops started hitting the board, and the paint started like running down the board, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm stuck with this board now. And
can't sell it.
Yeah. And this was a different era. There was stacks of boards in there in the warehouse, like, and there was boxes going in and out, headed out. Now it's like, stuff is being made in China. The industry isn't in San Francisco the same. Maybe it's just as big, I don't know. Like I said, I was very low on the totem pole at that time, so like I wasn't privy to that kind of like numbers and stuff like that. I didn't care about it. I didn't need to know about it. I was just like, I was the talent, I was the one grinding out. But I feel like they were doing pretty good, like, and I don't want to like cast a hit. Like I want to be able to like tell good stuff about it as well. But it didn't work out for me. It didn't work out for me. Basically one day I came in and I was like, you were probably going to get to the reason why I left.
Well, that was I was actually about to just ask you that, like, because you've been, in terms of telling your story today, I feel you've been pretty fair. Like you've told some of the ups, you've told some of the downs, what worked, what didn't, and I mean that's ultimately the conversation we wanted to have today, because ultimately with these like defunct company episodes that we're starting now, we want to talk about certain brands and why they were great and why they were there for their time, but ultimately why they weren't able to last.
Yeah.
Because the 90s in particular had so many brands that were just, they were quick flashes in the pan. And I mean, Think had a little bit more longevity. Like one of the episodes we want to eventually do with this idea is like Shorties. And I feel Shorties was way more a flash in the pan than Think was. Think was around for like almost 20 years. They just always seemed to be grasping at straws in different ways. But
it seemed like going into the newer era, and when I was just doing like a little refresher and research for this episode, all this stuff came back to me, like Cody Mack got on, and like all these other like gnarly dudes.
Baczynski too.
Baczynski, right. And
Hometown hero, by the way.
Which kind of maybe eventually turned into, what was it, City or...
Yeah.
Right? But it seemed to me that they maybe disappeared for a little bit for a while there, and then like they came back with like Adrian and all these other dudes that we mentioned, and that was kind of like their second wind. Being involved with High Speed and Thrasher and just having that behind them, it sounds like they had more of an advantage, more so as like distribution and money behind them to kind of stay afloat. Yeah. As opposed to like some other company that's like, well, we're kind of dying off. We don't have this huge machine behind us to keep pushing us.
Yep. So it was. I feel like looking back, it was a good mix between it being a skater-owned company, like that's what it was truly was. So you can never mess with that. Skaters owned the company. Fausto backed it. It was like undisputable like history. Can't mess with it. Greg Carroll brought his talent to the table. Fish brought his history to it, and Keith Cochran brought his kind of like brand of like Keith Cochran to it. So, but the thing, so there was that there was the talent involved, so that kept it going. There was another thing is that it was connected. It was Fausto's company, so it was like it kind of couldn't go out of business. It was connected to Thrasher. It was like as soon as a dude got on, they could start pumping somebody. They had the means, it was all plugged in. It was like, you could have clips in the Thrasher video because it was right across the street. It was like a done deal. That's where they had the advantage. And I don't want to say, kind of seemed like it was a little bit of a pet project in a way, that was never really 100% was put into it. But that's just sort of like, that wasn't everybody because like I was putting 100% into it, I know Greg was putting 100% into it, but maybe the higher ups were kind of like, this thing can exist as long as it makes X amount of money. We'll keep this going, and we're not going to like go in it overly, extend ourselves, but it's always going to exist because it was under the marquee of the people, Thrasher and Slap, so it was plugged in.
Thrasher was not during that time too. Me and Ted always joke around about the weird stuff that Thrasher used to put in their magazines with the snowboard ads and all this.
Oh yeah, ads for Marines and stuff like that.
Yeah, it sounds very on par with kind of what Think was doing too. They were trying weird stuff. They weren't necessarily focused all the time.
There was a lot of like missteps. I feel like when I rode for them, they were like 6 months to a year behind the current trends. It was funny because they were so anti what was going on at the time. So it was like, okay, I remember when Zoo York was heavy hitting, and this is before it got bought and sold and all that stuff, and it became like golfers' clothing and whatnot. But when I was riding for them, I was into Zoo York. Ricky was just off or whatever, but I was still into Zoo York as an image. So it was like a street company. And I remember the only shirt I used to want to wear was this like sewer lid that said Think on it, and I wasn't into all the other stuff. It was like all this weird graphics. They were totally like cartoons and stuff, and like I wasn't into it. And I would just get like the Think logo boards, and I would get these shirts with the Think manhole cover because it was kind of urban, But then a year would go by, and then they would have all these graphics that would be kind of like Zoo York, And then a little while later, like someone would come out with something. So they were like misstepping by a couple, just not getting it in time, And I don't know if it would have worked out if they would have like tried to like gravitate towards what was cool at the time, but like they were always kind of misstepping a couple moves behind. And I just remember that, and I feel like the inception or the beginning of City Skateboards was kind of like their Zoo York. Like they were like, okay, we're going to make our Zoo York. It's City Skateboards. If you think about it in that way, it's kind of like, it's like an SF version of that. Not to take anything away from it, because those dudes were so sick. That team was awesome. Like they did all this
Jeremy
rad
Reeves,
stuff.
Man, it was crazy.
Super good.
Yeah.
Alex Klein was on there.
Yeah.
I used to skate with him a lot around that time.
Alex Klein. Super nice guy.
Yeah.
So then ultimately, what made you decide to leave? And then going off of that, why do you think the company eventually went like, I don't know if they went under, they just called it quits or what, but like, why'd you leave? And then why did the company end up fading away?
So I started to get a lot of coverage. It was kind of like I felt a little bit like I wasn't being respected on the company, but I was still going to ride for them. I took the underdog perspective of, I'm just going to get so much coverage. I'm just going to like get more coverage than any pro they have, because I had the connections. I knew people at Slap and Thrasher and whatnot. So I was just like, I'm just going to do my thing, and I'm going to do it hard, and this is my chance. And I quit working at High Speed, and I just skated and I was like barely able to survive. I couldn't pay my bills, and but I made a really good effort at doing it. I got to the point where I was like, this is the era where to turn pro, you had to have a checkout in every magazine. You had to have a 411 Wheels of Fortune or a video part featured in something. And then you could get a board. That was pretty much all there was to it. It was not contest days or anything like that, but people had to know your name. And I remember at one point I had so much coverage, and Greg Carroll one time was like, yeah, I use you as an example to the other riders. Like, this is how it's done. And I'm like, okay, what's the problem then? And there was issue. And he went to Japan on the trip, and he's like, yeah, there was these Japanese skaters asking us when your board's going to come out. And I was like, usually that's enough to make it happen.
What's up with it?
Yeah. So I did my thing. I don't know how much people knew about it. I might have just been a blip on the radar, but in Japan's like a small place, really, granted, in skateboarding, especially at the time. I got a checkout in Thrasher. Not in Thrasher. I got some coverage in Thrasher, but I had Slap checkout, 2 Slap checkouts, Slap interview, Transworld checkout. I want to say Big Brother. So I'm bringing out some old stuff. But whatever. I had a checkout in like every magazine I could get, and they all said Think. People would come out to SF and they'd be like, "I thought you were on. Like I thought you were, or maybe pro or whatever." Like, and I'm like, "No, I'm just flow or whatever." I remember one time I was at FTC and I ran into Matt Field, and he's like, you're not on, and I'm like, no, I'm not. It's kind of like a gray area. And he's like, dude, you'd better march down there right now and tell them you need to be on. And I was like, okay, maybe I should, and but I just didn't have that confidence at the time. But what I did was I got all that coverage, and then I went in there and I was so nerdy about it, dude. Like, I took all the pictures I had in the magazines and I made Xerox copies at Kinko's. I printed them all out, and I remember they giving me beef because you're not allowed to copy things from copywritten material at FedEx or whatever copy place. So I had to do them secretly, and I brought in this portfolio. It's totally nerdy, looking at it now, but I was dedicated to my craft. This is my thing. So I was like, look at all this coverage I've gotten since I've been on. And it was laid out. I mean, I was making a PowerPoint presentation before there was such a thing, and Greg was like, okay, I'm glad you came here. And it was early one morning, and I got juiced up. I had 6 coffees, and I was ready to pitch my, I think he was impressed that I came through to him clear like that. But one of the things I never really grasped at the time was that a rider, and this is silly that I never grasped this, that a rider that's AM is eventually on a track to being pro. And if that's not the program, then they don't want to invest in you, So, in other words, they didn't just see me as we don't want to put you on. We want to turn you pro and work towards your shoe or whatever. I don't know, whatever. Probably didn't see me in that way, but what they do when you come to them with that is they say, let me check with the team. And that's the curse right there. Let me run this by the team, because if you get an opinion from a whole team, dude, somebody's gonna not be down for you. That's just the reality. It's somebody's gonna be like, well, no, dude, that dude, he's taking a piece of our pie. He's taking a big chunk out of our pie. I get it, but it's passing the buck a little bit, because 2 things happened when I was in that meeting. Veith Kilbert came in, and they were like, Veith, go to FTC and pick out a shape for your pro model. And I was like, okay, this guy's getting aboard, and he's Veith Kilbert. I heard he's the Muska of Europe.
That's so
he's never had a picture in a magazine. But he's getting aboard, and I'm like, I'm trying to weigh out this what's going on around me. And the other thing was, there was a series of ads at the time. It was it had pictures of the AMs, and it had this silhouette, and there was a question mark, and he's like, well, your timing is perfect because you could be the silhouette, And I was like, okay, cool. I that's cool. At least you're something to strive for. And then I think during the same meeting, he got a call on the phone and told someone else on the phone that they could be the silhouette. It wasn't. I'm not even joking. He's like,
wow.
The same basically pitched the same thing to some rider. It's a lot of pictures. I was doing my thing. But it just kept happening. Over the years, I would take a picture. I backside flipped the ice house bump, and that was probably the first big thing I did. Before that, I don't think there's any tricks on it. The ice house bump was at loading dock. There was a bump to flat to drop. It was gnarly. And I backside flipped that, and I shot a picture with Lance Dawes, and they would get the photo, and they would be like, it's kind of hard to see what you're doing. There's always an excuse, or I can't really see the graphic or something like that. And so, just that happened too many times. So I was just like, I had to basically make him say no, because I couldn't continue where I was on my path. And then I went back in. He's like, let me talk to everybody. And, he talked to him, and like somebody had something about, oh, he skates too slow or something, like, I don't know, or, whatever. Like my pants were like not the right pants, or, dude, you name it. Like some dudes are going to have a problem. Like, but I knew it was a kibosh when I sat down, and he was like, so who could you ride for? And I was like, okay, that's where this is going. Like, because he's like, well, with all the stuff that you have done, like, it shouldn't be a problem finding you a sponsor. And I was like, dude, I'm here with you guys. Like, what? You're shopping me out. So I was like, okay, I see where this is going, and I said, well, I skate with my friend Jeremy DeGlopper. At the time, I was skating with him a lot, and I rode for Iron Horse Grip Tape through Jeremy. And I was like, well, as Jeremy skates for ATM, I was thinking about, and before I could finish, they're like, oh, we'll call up John Fallahee, we'll get you on immediately. And I was like, wow. And it was just like kind of a shutout. And I was like, I was pretty bummed about that. And, I just kind of took it with a grain of salt. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to skateboard no matter what. I ended up riding for ATM. And, I got on, and I had to go down there to meet the team and see if we like jived together and see if it was going to be a fit. And I met Ryan Wiley, who's a team manager. He's the raddest dude. He knew all the movies I knew. We'd finish quotes from like Tommy Boy and Happy Gilmore and stuff. And he was a rad dude. He rips too, so it was cool. And he ended up telling me that the people at Think were like, yeah, Shawn wants to ride for you. And like they had a conversation about me, and he said that they told ATM I was a workhorse, and they're like, yeah, he's a workhorse, like you'll love him. And I was like, oh my god, dude, like, that's what I am. Like I'm just like, he'll rep your company, But I ended up skating for ATM for a while, so it was cool. It was a friend was on there, and to me that was the first time I skated for a company where I was really friends with somebody first, and then a teammate with them after that. And Jeremy was kind of like out of skateboarding a little bit, and I kind of brought him back into it a little bit. So it was a very mutual relationship. Like, I got him hooked up with, because he was from Southern California, so he didn't know anyone up here, but he was still pro, and like I'd connect him with photographers and filmers, and he hooked me up, and then we shared a video part in Fast Youth, which was the first ATM video I was in. But it's funny because all the footage that's in Fast Youth is all filmed while I was skating for Think. And they had no problem. They were like, I was like, is there a problem? Like, I'm wearing a Think sweatshirt and a board, like stickers, and they're like, no, it's no problem. We'll give you the first part, And I'm like, okay. Like, supposedly hot guy gets the first part. But I shared a part with Jeremy, because Jeremy was kind of like he was like a little bit slacking at the time. And he's like, Shawn, I really need a favor. Can we share a video part so I can juice this, And I'm like, yeah, no problem. You got me to where I am right now. Like, I'll share a video part with you, and it's all good. And then they laid the video out, and like I'm pretty psyched on my footage, but half the video part was like no skate sounds, and like, and then I have a couple tricks in another part that doesn't even make any sense. Like, It is what it is.
Well, I mean, thanks again for doing this today, Shawn.
Yeah, thanks.
I mean, it was nice to just nerd out about that. I mean, not only did like we get to rehash on all that, but like I learned so much about Think I mean, being a small town kid in skateboarding, I never really knew too much about Think. Like Jeremy, you talked about like how being in the city, you had this perception of Think, but growing up in the sticks, Think was one of those things that like we just knew about it, but we didn't know too much. So,
well, it makes a lot of sense hearing the backstory behind it, and just kind of the ambiguity of their existence and their lifespan, and just hearing all of it. it makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah. And, I really appreciate what you guys are doing because, like, you're psyched on skating. Like, you don't have any backers to do this. You're just doing this out of your pure passion. And, like, that's kind of like where I come from in the same way is, like, I love skateboarding and I'm dedicated to doing it. And it's just like, it's a one-of-a-kind thing. In the end, it doesn't matter as long as you're, like, doing your thing and you're expressing yourself, in your kind of ways. Like, it's really cool. So it's been really cool sitting down with you guys, and it's really fun to have someone actually like want to hear your stories and listen to you. I hope I didn't sound too much like give it a bad name.
Not at all.
Thanks, guys.
If anything, now we know way more about Think.